Hey guys, Paul here. I wanted to make a video on Ayn Rand and Objectivism, and the reason why is because it was a book that was influential to me, especially when I was younger, and a lot of people like it, read it, and go by basically what she preaches, and there's a lot of good philosophy and stuff in there. I'll give a brief overview of what she believes in, and then some critiques that kind of don't really envelop the whole human experience, that if you just fully become an Ayn Randian, the problems you'll run into. So obviously she touches on a lot of topics, but as far as economy is concerned and relationships are concerned with other people, she is a hyper rationalist. She is believes in meritocracy, so everything in the world should be a hierarchy of merit. So the better you are at something, the more competent you are at something, the higher you should be in the hierarchy, the more you should earn, all this stuff. And then the more you earn is because people recognize your competence and they give you more money. And she juxtapositions this against power, right? Power that is not earned, but is titled, either through election, manipulation, whatever it is. So it's not based on competence, it's based on being elected and given a title and being paid something for that title rather than having to earn that position. And so she kind of divides the world up into capitalists. Capitalists are people who live based on merit and competence, and moochers especially, which is like politicians, people who promote communism, people who promote social programs, all this stuff, because they basically put themselves as part of as the leading part of an organization, whether the organization is a government, a nonprofit, a church, whatever it is, and they end up raking in all the money while being the morally, high superior, high ground person, and saying, oh, I do this, like I deserve this money essentially because I'm doing so much good for the world, and I'm redistributing the funds, while really every single person has a self-interested side. And all those moochers do, they just put on a show for everybody else, and they basically suck everything out of society, and they're not based on competence, they're based on being given a title and a position that isn't earned based on merit. So that's kind of as far as that goes. As far as relationship goes, she kind of believes that everything should be based on admiration, from what I could tell. So if you see someone and you really look up to them based on who they are, based on their intelligence and the stuff they've achieved, it is okay to be romantically attracted to them. And then if you find someone who is better than the person you were with, it is totally natural to be attracted to that new person more than this previous person, because that person has a higher status and standing in society based on their competence and merit. She doesn't really present marriage as a option. She does believe in stable relationships and dedication to the person you admire, but also if new people come along that are better off, you basically move on to them. Now, that's kind of going over all that. She has an absolutely wonderful speech by Francisco d'Anconia in her book Atlas Shrugged, about money, and how money is basically good and its actual measure of value of what people produce in this world, because you basically exchange money for goods and services. And anytime this exchange takes place, that means you deem whatever that person produced as higher value than the money you possess. So you're willing to give the money away because whatever they're giving you in return is equal or higher value, right? Because if your money was worth more than whatever they're giving you, you'd never exchange it. So if you become a millionaire or a billionaire or a trillionaire based on services and goods that you produce, and people are morally buying it from you, not because they're being manipulated to or mandated to, but because they by free choice decide to pay for your services because they deem them better than the money they possess, and they're doing this exchange, you are not only a morally superior and good person, you're literally the epitome of what it means to be a capitalist who does maximum good. And so for her theory of objectivism, good is achieved by producing goods and services for people exchanging their money for your goods and services, and money is almost a currency of goodness and morality in her worldview, which makes sense. And then people who get money by means of manipulation, lying, deception, those are the ones she calls moochers, and they're basically getting money through lies, right? And they're not in real standing. And so money in itself, when properly used and properly earned without deception, manipulation by moral means, literally becomes the currency of morality. And people who possess the most money while being 100% moral are basically the priests, right, of society that we should follow. Now let's switch to the critiques. I can keep going and going on the topic. Like, she literally wrote a big ass book on it. But the critiques to her. So in her books, everyone behaves reasonably and rationally. This is one of the first things you learn when you take sales classes, or if you ever learn sales or marketing, is people are not rational. People are moved by essentially by their limbic system. They have a lot of triggers. If they feel emotionally safe and secure with you, they will do things that you want them to do. They will buy stuff from you. They will pay for your services because of how you make them feel, not because it is not often not because it's reasonable or rational. People are willing to pay more for those feelings you create within them. And people also, vice versa, have triggers where they behave in ways they don't want to, right? Most people can relate to this. You do things that you don't want to do. You react a certain way. Something triggers a certain behavior in you that you lash out. You do things. People are basically irrational. This is like one of the first rules of sales. Same thing, if you guys know Charles Finney, he was one of the people who are responsible for one of the great awakenings in the United States. He was like a missionary preacher. And he said that you don't have to be Christian or be led by the Holy Spirit. If you say the right words in the right tone and you do all the right things, people will come to God and repent and change their lives around regardless of your personal beliefs. Because if you said the right things, God will use it. He was also known for using music during praying and during preaching, a music that will soften people's hearts and put them in a different state and want to repent and come to God. And when people said that that's manipulation, he said, no, every tool under the sun, including psychology and playing people's emotions, are tools that God has given us, and we have to use every tool to bring people to God. And I don't care what the tool is or how it works. If I can use it, I will. So that was essentially his philosophy, and it works. Most of the highest paid salespeople in the industry know that people can be easily manipulated, and that also people, even when we're not talking about sales or money, people just do things irrationally all the time. And so that's one big fault that's not accounted for in any of her philosophy, is just lack of rationality, lack of reasonableness. Because most people, even the smartest people in the world, have unreasonable periods. They act unreasonably and they don't know why. We even have like cycles, hormonal cycles. I mean, women have their monthly, but also there's like the menopause, like they go through menopause, their hormones all over the place. Men have the same thing. If you don't eat proper foods, if you don't exercise enough, your testosterone drops. You go through a different cycle. You enter a period of depression on a biological level. You're literally experiencing different things. And regardless how much you think that, oh, I'm a capitalist, I'm a meritocracy advocate, I'm going to do all these things, I'm going to build a new nation, your body is literally shutting down. You're literally producing tons and tons of cortisol, and you can't get up in the morning and make your bed, regardless of what your morals are and what your ethics are. You just don't have the will because your biology is shutting down on you, because your hormones aren't in check. All this to say, people generally are unreasonable. Things happen where we behave in ways we don't want to. And that unreasonableness is completely unaccounted for. Also, if you've noticed in any of her books, she believes that you can do charity, but it has to be from the fullness of your heart, not because you feel guilt or because you feel led to, because then that person that you're giving this to becomes the moocher, right? They're mooching off of you, and they're using their emotional, crying and all this stuff as manipulation. It doesn't build up. It's like a negative emotion that's being used to manipulate you to give them money and care for them. But if you are out of the charity and fullness of your heart want to give it to them, and it makes you feel good to do that, you're also doing it out of self-interest, and you are allowed to do that, and charity is part of the philosophy, but it has to come from a place of surplus. Not, I'm needy, I'm going to give this to you. Like, she's completely opposed to sacrifice. And the reason why is because everyone should produce equal or higher amount than what they take back. So, like, again, exchange of value, exchange of goods and services. If you're giving more money to someone, they have to produce something of equal value or greater back, and that's how society is built. But if you're constantly feeding the leeches of this society, people who aren't producing, people who aren't putting stuff back into society, you're literally devolving society and culture. You're literally feeding the thing that is destroying everything, which is basically leeching on resources but not putting enough resources back. And so the communist phrase, from everyone according to their ability to everyone according to their need, is like absolute blasphemy to her philosophy and to her. But here's a problem. In all of her books, in her entire book of Ayn Rand, there's no children involved. There's no families having children. These short-term relationships with people you admire. There's no long-lasting, like, legacy as far as children go being left. And the reason why is because children require sacrifice. Long-term relationships require sacrifice. And to her, self-sacrifice that is not based on self-interest is essentially a sin. Now, she may have just excluded children to not complicate her issues further, and it can be argued that you can have children out of self-interest and with full understanding of the facts of life and the difficulty they present, you voluntarily agree to paying the cost of having children. But really, no one's going to be having children because the cost, it's a risk it's a 50-50 risk about how your children will turn out, right? Sure, there's genetics and stuff, but you never know. They could die being 16 years old, and you've invested 16 years of your life into them, and then they die, right? There's no overall net positive benefit. There's so many arguments that could be made anti-children. I believe she never had children of her own, and essentially the philosophy, as much as you want to spin it to be pro-children and pro-having families, because of the amount of time, and if you've never had children, you're going to argue like, oh, you could do this. If you've had children, you will agree with me that children require sacrifice. Children require a huge chunk of your life, and there's never a guarantee that they're going to produce more than what they've cost. That's always the hope. You can always do your best to do it, but it's not a guaranteed success the way that like producing actual machinery and robots is, right? So like, why not spend your entire life developing an AI robot that's going to do all these things, which is guaranteed to work because everything's fixable and rational inside a robot, as opposed to a child who may have certain illnesses, who may die early, may have illnesses that aren't fixable, who might be of low intelligence, that can't produce much stuff, like could be lazy, who could just rebel against your instruction and direction and just live their own life. Like Elon Musk, right? He had a transgender child that he basically disowned because he didn't like who they are. Like all these uncontrollables. So Ayn Rand's philosophy does not allow for children, which to me is like one of the biggest faults in any philosophy. Is like if a philosophy cannot be reproduced in the sense of literally allowing the human race to move on and get bigger and reproduce and grow and all this stuff, that philosophy has a fault built into it. Like that's a huge fault, because self-sacrifice is required. And the other thing is you can't account for all factors. Oftentimes you make a decision based on limited knowledge. Nearly all decisions are based on limited knowledge. There's always an unknown. And because of that unknown, with children or with anything you take on, you can't 100% rationalize it. Sure, you can have an attitude of capitalism and meritocracy that she presents as like what I'm going to do and what I'm going to stick to. Sure, yes, you can. But also, there's going to be things that will require self-sacrifice that you did not account for, where you're going to have to make the choice of, do I continue down this path and keep sacrificing myself even though it's not paying off much? Or do I retain myself and follow something new? And I think a huge part of it's almost like an immaturity in a way, where you sacrifice things because they are producing too much self-sacrifice for you. Like you're pursuing a certain relationship, or you're pursuing raising a child, or you're pursuing a certain career or invention, and it has caused you so much pain that you're like, okay, this is causing me more self-sacrifice that I'm willing to put up, and self-sacrifice is bad if it's not paying off. Therefore, I'm going to leave this venture and I'm going to go pursue another venture where my abilities and talents can be used to reap much better benefits. And so what it causes is what's called like an immature entrepreneur mindset, where you're hopping from one thing to another because all these things require sacrifice. And they require a lot more sacrifice that you're willing to put up. And a lot of times the sacrifice doesn't pay off at all. You can spend 10 years working on something and nothing comes of it, and then you're like, I'm done, beating a dead horse. I'm done, like, sunk cost fallacy, investing so much time into this that doesn't pay off. I'm gonna switch to something else because that's the rational, reasonable thing to do. And then you switch and you go through that whole process again, and sure, at the end of the road you learn something, but that self-sacrifice without production can last for years. And people who really persevere through the self-sacrifice that doesn't pay off, and they do it anyway, oftentimes results in an unreasonable, unexpected, by the luck of the draw way of the way the earth works and the way that life works sometimes, they produce something beautiful in the end. And sometimes inadvertently. A lot of stuff and a lot of inventions were made inadvertently, meaning like unintentionally. It was by accident. Like freaking Viagra was a side effect of a different drug that was being tested for something else, and now it's like prescribed for everybody for erectile dysfunction. Same thing with certain glues. Same thing with penicillin. Penicillin was straight up mold, right? That was left out, that grew, that the person that was testing it was completely something else, ended up discovering that it has incredible healing properties. And penicillin alone was one of the number one drugs in, I believe, World War One. I don't remember if it was the first one or the second one, that was responsible for healing millions of people from all kinds of infections. And penicillin was an accidental discovery. And it wasn't people working their ass off getting it. It was like they were working on stuff, and then by a side effect, they discover this thing that changes the world. Like sometimes people who don't put any effort discover amazing things, and then people who put in all the effort into one thing can be a failure their entire life. Like life is unreasonable. Like in hers, everything is pre-calculated. You put in the work, you get the results, and that's all beautiful, but it's sterile. Like her whole philosophy is very sterile because it does not account for all the unaccountables of life. And so that's one big critique I have of it, is that people are irrational, they're unreasonable. Our plans often don't work out. The things that we do end up pursuing don't turn into anything. And sometimes the things that we don't pursue at all turn into something huge. And we didn't even put effort into achieving it. We were just living life and kind of stumbled upon it. Like I have several friends that stumbled upon a good business idea that basically fell into their lap. Like one of the guys, someone called him and like, hey, can you do this for me? I need someone I can rely on. I need you to do this for me. I don't want to go into like too detailed, but he ended up helping this guy out. And then he ended up becoming a middleman for international transfer of inventory. This is not drug related. This is like actual company that he owns selling products. And then he basically ended up establishing a relationship with a Ukrainian manufacturing plant and reselling everything in the United States, and became rich. Like he's a millionaire, multi-millionaire now. And it basically fell into his lap. Someone asked him for his help. It worked out. He made some money. He's like, oh, cool, let me keep doing this. And he's doing it. And then I know people who work 10 times harder than him, that are a lot more intelligent than him, who are not nearly as successful as he is. And you could be like, well, that's merit, that's capitalism, that's him putting in the work. Yeah, but the other person that put in 10 times as much work and is a lot more intelligent hasn't succeeded just because life just has a luck of its own. And I feel like her objectivism philosophy does not account for that portion of it at all. So the unreasonableness of people and the unexpected luck and draw of life is completely unaccounted for. Necessary self-sacrifice that goes beyond what you think your natural limitations are and desires are is often necessary for giving birth to something beautiful, even when you think it's not worth it. Believing some abstract concept that it's worth it in the end, and it will pay off and will push you to keep going rather than just cutting something off from, sucking the life out of you. Going through that death process and then rising like a phoenix, like as mythology goes, oftentimes pays off in like things you never know and never understand. And sometimes the self-sacrifice that you do does bring about changes. Jesus' law of non-resistance is also based on this point that I just talked about, which she is really opposed against, is like turning the other cheek. She says you should never turn the other cheek. All that does is just breeds more weakness and more people taking advantage of you and more bullies growing, and like turning the other cheek is absolutely detestable philosophy. And on the other hand, if you do an eye for an eye all the time, it leaves the world blind, right? So someone takes your eye out, you take their eye out, their anger grows, they retaliate again, you retaliate again. And so this resentment and bitterness and hatred for each other, it grows generation to generation. But if one person decides to swallow the sins of others, so if somebody mistreats you, somebody plucks your eye out, if somebody stabs you in the back, if you give them love back and actually care and, show them that you care back, there are times where that person becomes redeemed, so to say. Like they literally have a change of heart and they turn into a better person and they start passing the goodness forward. And so oftentimes self-sacrifice can literally rid people of evil and change them. There are people that are unchangeable, that are straight up born demons and going to hell because of the way they live their lives and absolutely never learn a lesson. Sure, those exist. Like there's psychopath killers that they are brought to testify and they're like, I literally don't regret a single thing I did. And if I was put in that situation again, I would literally do it again. I loved killing every person I killed. Like obviously there's people like that. They're completely unredeemable. And they were basically, whatever happened to them that made them that way, whether it's genetics or upbringing or both, they're completely unredeemable. But a lot of people are redeemable. And so that self-sacrifice that you put in can actually change people's lives. And I think it is a necessary component, although it's hard to articulate and draw the specific line of where it is and isn't appropriate. I believe it is still a very important factor to consider, that there are reasons for self-sacrifice, even if it doesn't pay off in your lifetime. It might pay off at some point in the future. Again, I brought this book up before. There's a book called The Prosecutor, or I'm Sorry, Natasha. In Russian, it's called Прости меня, Natasha. Old book about a guy that essentially beat Christians, like Protestant Baptist Christians, and killed them under the Soviet rule. And one lady that he beat several times on several occasions for coming to church meetings, the way she looked at him and treated him with love, despite him being the abuser, the bully, and essentially the murderer of her, years later, him remembering that she did that to him and did not retaliate, did not pay back, and essentially turned the other cheek, literally changed his life. He gave his life to God, ran away from the KGB where he was part of it, and started preaching to other people how to live a different life. Like, so that one self-sacrifice that did not pay off to that woman's life paid off in a different way. So those are my two biggest critiques, right? I agree with a lot of her stuff. I agree that great relationships are built on admiration. Like if you admire the person you're with, I believe that's going to build a very sustainable long-term relationship, and you're going to grow love towards each other that's based on that admiration and adoration that you have for them. So I agree there. But also I believe in commitment and self-sacrifice once the commitment's made. Also, I the unreasonableness of life. Also, I believe that you should have an attitude of capitalism meritocracy. The attitude should be there, but it should also be nuanced, allowing for irrationality of people's responses, allowing for the fact that people aren't separated into two categories of capitalists and moochers. People are very complex. They can switch between different modes depending how desperate they are and what's going on in their life and their situation. People can have 5 different personalities nested in them based on their hormonal cycles. They can be the depressed, lazy person who sits at home and rots in bed all day. And that same exact person, something happens to him, he gets his shit together, he finds a person that's supportive of him, and he blossoms into this very, so it's not an ideological thing. It's literally something happened in his life, a certain change happened, change of environment, change of friends, and all of a sudden this guy, without even thinking, becomes a ambitious, a goal achiever. So people can be divided into the 2 categories. People span hundreds of categories, and dozens of different personalities can be nested within them. They can be triggered by different biological factors or environmental factors that it triggers them, and they literally turn into the angry person that's very destructive, or the very peaceful person that is trying to make life work. And so all these things are very unaccounted for. She has like a very sterile, isolated, and I understand why she did that, because it's hard to develop everything in a philosophy, but the whole measure of a good philosophy is that it explains all the nuances of life. So those are the biggest things that I really was stumped with when I was reading her book, and I was like, these things, I love the philosophy, I love what she's trying to do, I love what she's trying to say. I agree with a huge chunk of it, but it is so sterile from the actual everyday life that we experience that it is difficult to apply. It's difficult to apply because it does not take into consideration all the nuances that happen in people's personalities, and all the nuances of life, and the whole spectrum of the human psychology that should be enveloped. What she did, from my understanding, is she took the way her own mind works. She's very rational, very analytical, and she took that and she projected it onto everybody else. But people's minds do not work in such clockwork fashion as hers does. And to put them into rectangles and say, okay, this guy is in this box, and this is how he functions, and this box, and this is how he... You don't understand how a quarter of these people function. And even if you do, all you're seeing is their behaviors. You don't understand what's going on inside their heads for them to behave this way. Sure, you can infer. Sure, there are studies that show that it probably happens this way and that way. But at the end of the day, if those people, especially their very artistic, creative types, were to write a book and to paint the world with their colors rather than the analytical, mathematical colors, the world from their perspective would be completely different. And that needs to be accounted for as well. Oh yeah, that's the other thing, is the beauty, the creative part of life is that's another thing that I saw is very sterile within her. There's no... All of beauty is in literally merit and capitalism, but there are so many different aspects, social aspects. There's people who are genuinely, being around them is upbuilding and uplifting for your soul. There's actual people like that. And nobody pays them to be that way. But if everything is based on merit and capitalism, should those people not earn money for being the great people that they are? And usually everyone takes advantage of them, the people that are very wholesome and uplifting, and nobody's paying them money to just be themselves. Whereas the analytical types who are just being themselves and building trains and have an autistic obsession on one specific technical achievement, and they fully obsess over it and achieve it, all of a sudden their service and their good that they've created is available for everybody, and everyone's willing to pay millions of dollars for this thing that they invented. But people who have... there's actual social value in certain social people that literally sustain relationships, that make marriages last, that make children grow up to be good people. Those things are often can't be monetized. They don't have a assigned monetary value to them, but they're real measurable, psychologically measurable, and literally on a biological level measurable by people actually being happy around them, how much good they produce. I'm at 30 minutes. I'm going to wrap up my rant here. But yeah, this was a brief discussion and critique of Ayn Rand's philosophy and things that she doesn't account for. I'm not saying that what she said was wrong. I'm just saying it's not complete. There's another side to issues that are a lot more nuanced and a lot more colorful than the things she presents. So if you are going to live by her philosophy, make sure you take those into account and allow for the whole spectrum of humanity rather than just the analytical one. Thanks for watching, guys, and see you later. Peace. Bye. Body, mind, soul, spirit.